Our aim in this video is to find a grand general theory of change, a theory to explain any and all change whatsoever without exception. We're looking for a grand theory, not a theory to explain only a specific kind of change. And this is an analysis of change per se. It's not about let's look at change over there and then there and then there to produce an inductive argument. We're going to use philosophy and logic to understand the general characteristics, features of change. And we'll be utilizing the great textbook by Father Norris Clarke called The One and the Many, A Contemporary Thomistic Metaphysics, which I recommend even for beginners. Change in general refers to the transition of a real being to something else. A before and after is there to compare. More specifically, an accidental change is a change that occurs within the same identical being through the transition. Something changes about it, in other words. And a substantial change is a change that occurs when a being changes into another kind of being altogether. A being changes into a new being, or multiple beings, in other words. Now, this is metaphysics. It's not physics. Physics deals with specific kinds of changes. It presupposes that things out there in the world exist, that they maintain their existence, and that they change. And then you can try to model mathematically some of those types of changes. But metaphysics thinks about the preconditions for change to even occur in the first place. What are the general features or characteristics to change? What are the features or general characteristics of change in general? And this is not mere empiricism. Clearly, we have empirical observations of things that change, but we don't go into the laboratory to do a metaphysical analysis. It takes logic and reason. And again, we're thinking about the general features, characteristics of change. And we're going to be referencing, like I said, the great book by Norris Clarke. Let's consider the argument outline. First, there must be a principle of difference. Otherwise, by definition, no change occurred. So there must be two terminal modes of a being's actuality, from A sub 1 to A sub 2. Second, there must be a principle of underlying continuity or permanency. Otherwise, no change occurred of something because there was no transition from one mode of being to another. That underlying continuity must have a potentiality to change. A sub 1 has the potential to become A sub 2. Moreover, insofar as there is no underlying continuity, there would be no connection between alleged terminal modes of before and after. Rather than a change of a being, there would only be the destruction of a being and then the creation from nothingness of another being. To be sure, while somebody can argue that position without any kind of logical contradiction, it is nevertheless implausible by examining how I or you change, where our memory, our personal development, our sense of self, and so forth are not mere illusions, or how chemicals change in the science laboratory. For example, when a compound is broken down to individual and separate elements. Third, these principles are distinct or irreducible. The actuality of before changes to the actuality of after. That is, actuality comes and goes, but the principle of continuity stays through the process of change. That is, insofar as change is taking place, there is a potentiality being diminished into the new actuality. While these two principles are distinct, they are not independent of each other. A being of act and potency is an incomplete being. These are incomplete correlative principles. Just consider the transition taking place in change. A being is losing an old actuality and gaining a new actuality, all the while a being's potential to have the new actuality is becoming less of a potential by becoming actual. Fourth, it needs to be open to change. The principle of continuity is intrinsic to change. It is in fact affected in the process of change. That is, it is really modified in the change. Otherwise, there would be no change of something. And thus, it must have a principle that allows it to change. It loses something real, and gain something real. Fifth, potency limits. Change in a being is limited to its potentiality. In reality, a being's potency is simply the different real modes of being it can take on. Things have an open potency to change and are closed to what they cannot change to. A being's full nature is its potency to be certain things, and that can be expressed negatively in what it cannot change to. Now, something like potency, as Father Clarke explains, is inaccessible and inadmissible for empiricist philosophers. Since it's impossible to directly observe potency, the empiricists will argue that there's no basis to claim potency is a real metaphysical principle that exists. Yet this closes the door to a full understanding of what we observe around us. For example, all canned language will be destroyed. Ability, aptitude, and capacity lose their meaning. It becomes impossible to really explain what seems to be dispositional properties that things really do have. For example, chemical substances. Without saying, for example, water has a dispositional property to do such and such under XYZ conditions, we really do lose intelligibility. And that's one good reason, in fact, to embrace the metaphysical distinction between act and potency. Act and potency is what explains change. This, of course, has just been a sketch of the argument. To understand what change is, that we need the metaphysical components of actuality and potentiality to explain change. At my website, amateurlogician.com, by the way, as you may know, I have an extensive tutorial on traditional verbal style logic. Feel free to contact me with questions, suggestions, corrections, and so forth. I would appreciate it. Thanks for your viewership, and be well.